Well, good afternoon. My name is Abby Edens, Director of Education at the National World War II Museum, and I want to welcome you to our Lunchbox Lecture program. Today's program is made possible by AARP Louisiana. Our presenter today is retired Army Sergeant Major Chris Lewis, who is the Director of Education and Volunteer Services at the National Infantry Museum, located in Columbus, Georgia. His talk, entitled Triple Nickles, the 555th Parachute Infantry in World War II, will dive into the history and the legacy of the 1st African American Parachute Battalion. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Chris.
Hey, good morning, everybody, from here at the National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, Georgia, or actually we're in Columbus, right off post here from Fort Benning. Thanks for everyone for joining us today. As Abby mentioned earlier, I'm a retired Sergeant Major, just retired this past year with 32 years of service as an infantryman and a paratrooper. When I got asked earlier this year if I'd like to do a presentation about the Triple Nickles of the 555th Parachute Infantry, I jumped at it. I'm kind of a World War II airborne guy, big part of me personally and professionally. But I just think it's a great story of this unit. A lot of people don't know about it, about this organization and what they did and the trailblazing things they did, not only for African Americans in the Army, but for Army as a whole. And before I get started into this whole the lecture today, I just want to introduce our new Vice President of Operations. His Command Sergeant Major retired Freddie Celestine. So he's now my boss again. He was the Post Sergeant Major here at Fort Benning, just retired here this past month. And as a non-commissioned officer and a senior NCO and as a young paratrooper and ranger in the Army, I just wanted him to share his thoughts about how the Triple Nickles.
Hey, Chris, first off, hey, thanks for having me. And I really appreciate this actual webinar. It just, it actually touches me when I think about the Triple Nickles, when you talk about the inspiration for a young African American in the military. It really inspired me, really bridged the gap of showing me that possible is not impossible. So for all those out there listening on this webinar today, I will tell you the lineage and the story of First Sergeant Harris really made it possible for a young Specialist Celestine. It made me inspired to want to be airborne. It made me inspired to want to be better and do better. So with that being said, I just want to thank you all for helping us honor such a prestige lineage of our Army. Thank you. All right, Chris, appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Thanks, appreciate it. Okay, and before you start too, I just want to point out, so this lovely background I have isn't just a virtual background. We're actually we have a World War II company street here at Fort Benning. This museum was built about 10 years ago. They actually took one type of each building that was constructed here during World War II and moved them here over into our museum campus. So I'm actually broadcasting from an actual World War II barracks building that was used by infantrymen and soldiers here at Fort Benning during the Second World War. Okay, so we'll get started here, folks. I hope that everyone can see the slides that we have here. And again, thanks to Sergeant Major Freddie Celestine for those opening remarks. Okay, so the Triple Nickles, the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion. Okay, oops, sorry about that. Okay, we can trace its origins as a parachute battalion back to 1942. Now, at this point in the war, early part of World War II, the concept of using parachute troops and glider troops into airborne divisions was a huge thing for us as an Army, and especially here at Fort Benning with the parachute school and a lot of airborne doctrine being developed here at Fort Benning. With that being said, so in early 1942, there was a recommendation made by what was called the Advisory Committee on Negro Troop Policies, which had been formed in Washington on 27 August 42 to study the expanded use of Negro troops and the broader social problems that may accompany their service and additional use within the Army. Why was that? Because that was the culture of our society here in the United States at that point. So they got this committee together to look at, can we use Negro troops and other types of units within the Army besides ones they were already being used for now? So a key member of this committee was Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis. So that's the guy you see here on the right. Pretty important person in our nation's history. Brigadier General Davis was the first African American general officer in our military. Had served in the Spanish American War, World War I, and of course during the Second World War. One of the many recommendations made by this committee that General Davis was on was for the activation of a Negro parachute battalion for the purposes of enhancing morale and the esprit de corps of the Negro people. When the committee's report was presented to General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, in February 1943, next to where on the actual paper report, next to where the report referenced an all-black parachute battalion, he wrote in the margin of that actual report, he wrote, "Hey, start a company." So when the Chief of Staff of the Army kind of says things, people kind of jump, and it ends up turning into be policy in a lot of cases. So on 25 February 1943, authorization was given by the War Department and headquarters of Army Ground Forces for the constitution of the 555th Parachute Infantry Company at Fort Benning. Now, constitution means that they're putting it on paper like, hey, we're going to do this. It doesn't necessarily mean that the unit's going to be activated, okay? So Fort Benning in 1943, all right? So this slide here. So again, as with the war effort in full tilt, by early 1943, Fort Benning had been transformed into one of the largest training facilities for the United States Army. A home for thousands of soldiers, infantrymen, armored crew members, officer candidates, and many others preparing for overseas combat duties during the Second World War. And if you can look here at this photo here, the top photo is an actual panoramic photo of Fort Benning taken in 1941. If you look here, there's one of the jump towers. So this picture was actually being taken from one of the other jump towers. Imagine being the photographer told, hey, you get to climb up a 250-foot tower and take a picture, right? We have an officer candidate school class. Below him, that figure might look very familiar to some of you. That's General George Patton, who was commanding the 2nd Armored Division here at Fort Benning during that time frame. And then we have an infantryman with his trusty M1 Garand, and of course the very important combination of armor and infantry as a maneuver element, much like what we continue to train here at Fort Benning even today. Sorry. Okay, so unique to Fort Benning was called the Parachute School, what we now know as called as Jump School or Airborne School. Very, very unique thing here during the Second World War. So students would go through a 4-phase, 4-week course of parachute instruction, physical fitness training, rigging, packing parachutes, would culminate in doing 5 jumps from a C-47 aircraft in order to earn the coveted parachutist badge and the title of United States Army Paratrooper. So these are all pictures that were taken from here on the grounds of the parachute school during the Second World War. Paratrooper student here learned how to control his risers after landing on the ground. Guys here by the airfield at Lawson Army Airfield putting on parachutes. Of course, the 250-foot towers, which many of us call, their nicknames are the Mighty Ungawas, which is a whole other story in itself. Parachute rigging tables, and then this is actual yearbook that you would get when you went to jump school during the war. Now, first, Sergeant Major Celestine, Freddie, he mentioned earlier a guy named First Sergeant Morris. So let's talk about First Sergeant Morris. So with all these soldiers that were here at Fort Benning at this point in time, training to become the next generation of soldiers and to serve in combat during the Second World War, we had a guy named William Morris, and that's the gentleman you see here in this photo. So William Morris is one of these guys here at Fort Benning. So he'd enlisted in the Army in January 1940. 6 months after graduating high school in Waynesville, Georgia, with his eventual goal, he wanted to become a commissioned officer. So in early 1943, Morris was in week 12 of the 13-week officer candidate school here at Fort Benning when he was washed out of the course. Really can't find any research to say why he was washed out, but while this was going on, so he had to face an academic review board for his dismissal. While he was in that board, it was recommended that he transferred to one of the 3 service companies or units that was here at Fort Benning and reapply for OCS in 3 months. So he chose to stay at Benning, and he actually asked to go or to be transferred to what was called the Service Company for the Parachute School. Within a few months, Morris was promoted to first sergeant of the service company and was seen by his men as a good leader who generally cared for his soldiers. So the duties of the service company were pretty simple. So when the students of the parachute school, when they left the training grounds, that area of the parachute school, around 1,600 hours every day, the African American soldiers of the service company would guard the training facilities, jump towers, the physical training areas, and the airfield, patrolling the grounds and pulling security on them until training resumed the next day at 0800 hours. So the daily monotony of the seemingly endless task began to take a toll on the morale of the 150 African American soldiers that First Sergeant Morris was in charge of. As the company first sergeant, Morris knew that he had to do something about it. And especially Fort Benning, with its deep southern roots, was very much a segregated Army installation, even though the 24th Infantry Regiment, an all-black unit, had been assigned to Fort Benning up until early 1942. Morris wanted his men to know that they were soldiers first and could accomplish anything that was put in front of them. So for several months, he'd been watching the training that jump school students went through. He felt pretty confident that he could lead his men to do the same while they guarded the training grounds, every night. So he just on his own developed a plan of operations, and about this time, about the fall of 1943, he just began training his guys. So he gathered soldiers who weren't on guard duty, marched them from the barracks to the training fields at the parachute school. He did PT, push-ups, sit-ups, and running. They practiced how to do parachute landing falls from a 5-foot platform. Basically, it teaches you how to properly distribute the shock of landing from a parachute jump. They practice how to stand up and hook up inside the mock fuselage of a C-47 aircraft, to include how to properly exit a C-47. So after several weeks, Morris really saw that their morale began to improve. It skyrocketed. They had confidence and began to look and act like soldiers who knew they were as good as any other soldier, black, white, or any other color. Now, the other thing with this photo, with this slide here, folks, is the TPS. That was the unofficial emblem for the parachute school that a lot of the instructors wore. There it is, those wings, the silver wings themselves. That is the United States Army parachutist badge, which is still awarded here at Fort Benning's Airborne School. Now, this guy here on the left, you kind of want to talk about a pretty important officer that really helped get the Triple Nickles started. Was this gentleman right here, Brigadier General Ridgely Gaither, who was the commander of the parachute school at this point. So with all this training going on, a lot of the activities that First Sergeant Morris and his soldiers were doing, it didn't go unnoticed. The biggest reason was there were folks around Benning that saw Morris and his soldiers training in what was supposed to be an off-limits area after 1,600 hours every day. So General Gaither and guys from his staff noticed this, and they were like, what's going on? So First Sergeant Morris was called to report to Brigadier General Gaither, the commander of the parachute school, to explain what he was doing. A very nervous first sergeant reported to the commandant's office. Brigadier General Gaither simply asked him to explain to me what I saw. The first sergeant explained his plan to raise the morale of the soldiers, the training involved, and then he took absolute full responsibility for it. As General Gaither looked at Morris, he could sense that the general wasn't really mad at him. In fact, Gaither had just received word that highly classified orders were en route to Fort Benning, authorizing Gaither to establish an all-black company-sized unit of paratroopers, which would eventually become the 555th Parachute Infantry Company. The timing for Morris's decision to train his men on the grounds of the parachute school was absolutely perfect. Gaither asked Morris to remain the first sergeant and actually become the first sergeant of this company that was going to be stood up, which of course he happily accepted. First Sergeant Morris would later be quoted as saying, "The entire post was making bets that we wouldn't jump. We'd be too afraid. The thing that inspired us all was this was the only black combat outfit then, and was an opportunity for black troops to enter something that they could be proud of." When he completed his jump training as the senior member of the 555th Parachute Infantry Company's test platoon, this would make First Sergeant William J. Morris the first African American paratrooper. Now, we look back at this photo, folks, right here, this picture here of First Sergeant Morris, he's actually getting his parachute inspected by one of the parachute school instructors right before his first jump. Can't imagine what thoughts were going through his head. I know what thoughts are going through my head prior to my first parachute jump way back when, but pretty important day in anybody's life. Now, some of the great things that we do here at Fort Benning, and hats off to the folks that handle the housing and stuff on Fort Benning. So this right here, this house that you're looking at is First Sergeant Morris's quarters from the Second World War. So these quarters, if you look here, this is what we call the Indian Head housing area on Fort Benning. It's not too far from the grounds of the parachute school. This picture, I actually took it about a week ago. So that's the way the quarters sit today. They are used for I think Staff Sergeant above folks that are stationed here at Fort Benning. This plaque is here on the front of the house that shows the historical significance of these quarters. And if you look here, I did my best, but I tried to superimpose a photo of First Sergeant Morris and his wife and one of their kids, infant daughter, I believe, standing on this, superimposed over current photo of the house. It's just pretty cool that we keep that history alive of where some true great pioneers in our Army where they stayed here on Fort Benning. That goes also, we have markers on a side note on other houses here in Fort Benning. There's the house where a young Major Dwight Eisenhower stayed when he was stationed here in the late 1920s, where Colonel Hal Moore lived, the battalion commander who Mel Gibson portrayed in the movie We Were Soldiers. You'll see a lot of significant historical markers across Fort Benning, just like here on First Sergeant Morris' house. Now, about the same time, so when Morris was selected to be the first sergeant of the Triple Nickel of the 555th Parachute Infantry Company, about the same time, the staff from the parachute school began screening recruits for an all-black parachute test platoon. This test platoon would form the nucleus of what would eventually become the 555th Parachute Infantry Company. Specific instructions were that all potential candidates would be volunteers, with the future enlisted cadre of this company to be selected from personnel from the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Division, which was an all African American division stationed at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. Of the original 20 soldiers that were selected for this African American test platoon, 17 came from the 92nd. One of 3 African American divisions that were actually activated during the Second World War. Okay, now, folks, this is kind of a neat thing. I have to hats off to a good friend of mine, some friends of mine up at the 82nd Airborne Division War Memorial Museum at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I found these over about a month ago when I was doing some research up there. So these are the actual orders where it says Headquarters, Airborne Command, Army Ground Forces, Camp McCall, North Carolina, dated 23 December 1943. Activation and organization of the 555th Parachute Infantry Company, which is activated effective 30 December 1943 at Fort Benning, Georgia. So the personnel assigned to this company were, again, the original folks from the 20 soldiers that had been selected to be the test platoon, who would undergo training at the parachute school. And kind of an interesting point doing my research, this was the only point in time in the Triple Nickles history where a white officer would command any element or unit in the Triple Nickles. So while the test platoon was training and they had yet to have any parachute qualified African American officers yet, a Captain William V. Johnson from the service company of the parachute school was assigned as the commanding officer for a very brief amount of time while the initial cadre officers for the Triple Nickles completed their jump training. First Lieutenant James Porter was the senior ranking African American lieutenant in the unit, would later become the company commander for the Triple Nickles, and he would eventually be assigned as the battalion commander of the 555th when expanded to a battalion. Okay, so we're looking here, now we can see some pictures and stuff what it looked like for the Triple Nickles when they were in Airborne School in 1943 and that time frame. So training began for the test platoon in mid-January of 44, taking each one of the student paratroopers through there were 4 phases of instruction during the course. Okay, so A stage was like the physical fitness and physical conditioning part of the 4 weeks of jump school. Okay, a lot of PT, a lot of endurance training, lectures, demonstrations, classes, covering the basic principles of parachuting and the equipment they would carry into combat. We go over. They would also go over adjusting the parachute harness, how to do proper parachute landing falls, how to protect themselves during landings. They'd also do mock exits of the C-47 aircraft, and they use a wind machine to get actually dragged across the ground with a parachute on them. The wind machine would blow them across the ground to show them how to get up and recover their parachute. Once they hit the ground, and also how to collapse a parachute. So this picture right here, this is actually a platoon of the Triple Nickles during a stage doing push-ups here in the grounds of the parachute school at Fort Benning. I think some things don't really change about Airborne School. You tend to do a lot of push-ups when you go there. So the B stage, which was the second week, focused on proper exit from an aircraft and maneuvering the parachute during parachute jumps. Students would be introduced to what was known as the suspended harness trainer, which many of us know better as suspended agony, where you learn to manipulate the main parachute risers while sitting in an actual parachute harness for about 20 to 30 minutes at a time, only about 2 feet off the ground, hence the term suspended agony. Jump commands such as get ready, stand up, hook up, check equipment, sound up for equipment check, and stand at the door were practiced and rehearsed so that each trooper would know these commands verbatim. They would also make several practice exits from the 34-foot tower in order for instructors to assess how they could properly exit an actual aircraft. C stage would have, the third week, would have the students experience the next best thing to a parachute jump by being hoisted up into one of the 4 250-foot towers in the grounds of the parachute school under an actual canopy mounted inside a ring. And that's what you guys see here, the 250-foot towers here at Fort Benning. Once they reach the top, instructions are given them from the ground, telling the student which way to move or slip their parachute. This uncontrolled descent from the tower would be the first parachute jump experience that thousands of parachute students would experience during World War II and are still sporadically being used today as a training apparatus here at Fort Benning. Now, D stage was, okay, that was the ultimate test. So the D stage was week 4. Students would train on packing parachutes and then would make 5 jumps from a C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft while in the skies over Fort Benning on the drop zone used by the parachute school. 4 jumps were made during a day and 1 parachute jump at night. Now, this photo here, kind of lucky, when doing some research, lucky to find some actual photos of the Triple Nickles. So this photo right here, newly graduated paratroopers from the original test platoon. So Sergeant Wesby, Sergeant Walden behind him, Sergeant Willis, and Sergeant Wheel. They lined up. So this was a training jump they were doing on dated 24th February 1944. But right after they had graduated, they were still trying to get some jumps in and get more practice and experience at doing it. Now this right here is also, this is the original test platoon aboard a C-47 aircraft for one of their 5 qualifying jumps while they're in Airborne School. So from right to left, we have Staff Sergeant Beal, Sergeant Beavers, Sergeant Bess, and Sergeant Corringay. Of note, folks, so Sergeant Beavers here, Sergeant Clarence Beavers, was actually the last original Triple Nickel from the test platoon to pass away, was about 10 years ago. All right, folks, so on 18 February 1944, First Sergeant Morris and 15 of the original 20 soldiers selected for the test platoon successfully graduated jump school. From this point forward, these new paratroopers will be commonly referred to as the Sweet 16 of the Triple Nickles. Okay, and here's First Sergeant Morris, as you can see here in the front, in this formation of the Sweet 16. Now, it's interesting, I wanted to point out this gentleman here. So this is Corporal Carstel O. Stewart. So Corporal Stewart was one of the original 20 soldiers, but he had to go on emergency leave while in training. He came back and actually made his his qualifying jumps the week afterwards. So he actually earned his parachutist badge on the 25th of February, 1944. Of the remaining 3 volunteers, 2 soldiers suffered injuries and they couldn't complete training. They actually stayed in the Triple Nickles as cooks and then eventually did go back through jump school. Technician 4th Class Emerald Jones and Technician 5th Class Cleo Washington. There was only one trooper, Private James William, that completely washed out of training for reasons unknown. So out of the original 20 troopers, 16 graduated in the original program of instruction, but the 3 of the remaining 4 would actually get their parachutist badge eventually. Pretty good record right there, I think. Folks, this right here, here's the parachutist badge, and this is the oval, the parachutist oval for the Triple Nickles, which is gold with a white inside the gold oval with a black background. These ovals were used to denote that you were on active jump status and what specific unit you're assigned to, because each ovals had a different color combination to indicate a specific unit. But this one here is for the Triple Nickles. Now, the officers, the first 6 officers that were, completed jump school with the Triple Nickles on 4 March 1944, these 6 gentlemen completed jump school and were awarded the parachutist badges. And with that, on the 4th of March, the Triple Nickel, the 555th Parachute Infantry Company now had a cadre where they could start training their fellow volunteers to build capacity for that company. So we have Lieutenant Jasper Ross, Lieutenant Clifford Allen, Lieutenant Bradley Biggs, Lieutenant Edwin Wills, Lieutenant Warren Cornelius, and Second Lieutenant Edward Baker. And these cross rifles here, the symbol for the infantry, where each one of these officers were qualified infantrymen, most of them having graduated the Infantry Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning before going to Airborne. Now, kind of a neat thing also found while doing this research. So we have this gentleman here in the blue box. His name was Sergeant John Estrite. Sergeant Estrite was from Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, and he was one of 2 white parachute school instructors that were assigned to train the test platoon for the Triple Nickles. I found a video interview of him, and he was quoted as saying, so when they offered it to him to be an instructor for the test platoon, he thought it was what he was supposed to do as a soldier. I guess they had offered it to a lot of other guys, some of whom were from the South, but the way, Sergeant Estrite grew up in Pennsylvania, so he didn't really understand the racial thing, and because he was there as a soldier and he was pleased to be there and honored to be given command of the test platoon, that's why he took it. Sergeant Estrite would actually later transfer to the 17th Airborne Division and would make a combat jump into Germany with the 17th on 24 March 1945 during Operation Varsity. He actually earned the Combat Infantryman's Badge and 2 Bronze Stars for his service during the Second World War. Now, I know I've been making reference to this, so let's talk about, so where did Triple Nickel come from? Well, folks, because the majority of the guys in the test platoon came from the 92nd Infantry Division, which its nickname was the Buffalo Division, from the early, I think it was 1905 to about 1938, the 5-cent piece that you would carry or you'd get in change from when you bought something at the store, the 5 and dime, was what they called an Indian head nickel. So this one's dated 1921. It has an Indian head in the front, but on the back it had a buffalo. So the Buffalo Soldiers, Nickels, the 555th Parachute Infantry, that's where you get the Triple Nickles from. Now, folks, the rock monument's against another monument that's here on Fort Benning. So originally it was established 1985 and put at the site of our old, where the National Infantry Museum used to be on Main Post Fort Benning. When that building was being repurposed to house the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, WINSEC, where that is now, they had to move a lot of the monuments that were outside the old Infantry Museum. So doing some research with some folks here at Fort Benning and with the staff at the United States Army Airborne School, the rock was placed at a point what used to be the frying pan area of Fort Benning. I'll talk about that here in a second. But where the monument is placed now is the exact spot where these lieutenants were awarded their parachutist badge in March of 1944. That's where that rock sits right now. Now it's on the way leaving Airborne School, going down to Lawson Army Airfield. So it was rededicated there in February of 2012, and pretty cool to see that every time I drive by it. Like, that's kind of where it all started for a lot of the Triple Nickles. That whole part of Fort Benning, the frying pan's on which basically is on a ridge line that's above Lawson Army Airfield, and the frying pan held all the temporary barracks and other barracks that were used to house Airborne School students during World War II. Now they were only built to last a few years, but interestingly enough, my father-in-law graduated jump school here in 1966, and he was still staying in those barracks at that point. Okay, so now we have the 555th Parachute Infantry Company, and as an infantry company, and they start developing capability to organize themselves as squad and platoons, so they start training. They are an infantry company, so they start learning infantry tasks. When they get to a strength about 7 officers and 119 enlisted men, they started doing some real dedicated training at the squad and platoon level. Same thing that every other parachute unit was doing in the Army. Everything from crew drills and the M19, 1930 caliber Browning machine gun and the M2 60mm mortars, which you see here, They also learned all the basics infantry tasks to include how to shoot in the M1 Garand, infantry battle tactics, things that soldiers needed to know, as well as land navigation, all the basics of being in a squad or platoon in an infantry company. So in mid-1943, the Parachute School at Fort Benning, which had previously operated underneath the United States Army Infantry School here at Benning, was reassigned to the newly formed Airborne Command. Since the school's facilities and training capabilities were continuously growing to meet the need for rapidly expanding demands for both parachute and glider trained personnel. So Airborne Command was initially at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, but eventually was moved to Camp Hoffman, which would later be renamed Camp McCall, just southwest of the western boundary of Fort Bragg. Camp McCall is still there in North Carolina, and Airborne Command would eventually be responsible for the planning, coordinating, and supervising of all training for parachute and glider units across the entire Army during World War II. So on 15 July 1944, the 555th Parachute Infantry Company actually moved from here at Fort Benning to Camp McCall, getting there on the 17th of July. They were assigned the headquarters Airborne Command and continued to receive newly parachute trained officers and enlisted paratroopers to the unit. Because of this expansion, on 25 November 1944, the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion was activated at Camp McCall, with the 555th Parachute Infantry Company being redesignated as Company A of the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion. Triple Nickles were now an authorized parachute infantry unit comprised of a headquarters detachment and three rifle companies, with an authorized strength of 29 officers and over 600 enlisted men. So here we see some of the training here at Camp McCall, postcards and photos of the airfield of McCall. This gentleman right here, Captain Porter, was the first, he was the commander for Company A, or I'm sorry, correction, he was the commander for the 555th Parachute Infantry Company. And then when it became a battalion, they just placed him in command of the battalion, which he was in that position for about half the time that the Triple Nickles existed as a parachute infantry battalion. In early 1945, the Triple Nickles were alerted for duty in Europe, only as a reinforced company of about 8 officers and 160 enlisted men. The reason why why the whole battalion wasn't activated or alerted for duty is because they had not yet reached their authorized strength as an infantry battalion, and they hadn't really done any battalion level operations or training. So they just kind of did it for training for a company size element. So kind of so the next thing here, folks, April 1945, a lot of things happened. So in April 1945, the requirement for the Triple Nickles to have a company sent to Europe kind of dissipated. We had the Germans on the run. We were only a few weeks really away from the Germans surrendering on VE Day. So that requirement for them to send someone to Europe kind of went away. But at the same time, they received classified orders to move from Camp McCall to Pendleton Army Air Base in Pendleton, Oregon, for duty with the United States 9th Army Service Command on a highly classified mission in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Nobody had any idea what the mission was. But the troopers of the Triple Nickles felt that they were ready for anything and they could take on anything that was put in front of them and accomplish that mission. They had an excellent training record while at McCall, with very few jump injuries, not one court-martial in the 10 months they had been there at McCall, and they had a very good reputation for physical fitness and proficiency in parachute operations. So Operation Firefly was the code name for the mission that they were going to go on. So on 5 May 1945, the troopers of the Triple Nickles left Camp McCall aboard trains heading to Pendleton Army Air Base in rural Pendleton, Oregon. No one really knew what it was, but there was definitely air of excitement during the 5 days of travel from Oregon to North Carolina, because no matter what, they finally had a mission. So Firefly would have the troopers of the Triple Nickles conducting operations in an environment they had never been trained for, fighting forest fires in the Pacific Northwest. So it wasn't just the fact it was a dry summer that year in the Pacific Northwest, but the Forest Service and the 9th Army Command was worried because the Japanese had introduced a new weapon on the battlefield that the Army was keeping very tight-lipped about for fear of causing widespread panic among the civilian population. The Japanese had developed these balloon bombs. So what they were incendiary devices that were be suspended from beneath a balloon, and with the way the trade winds flew across the Pacific went, a lot of those balloons ended up in the Pacific Northwest, and we'll go back to that here in a little bit. So, ironically, on the 6th of May, 1945, a day after the Triple Nickles had left Camp McCall, a woman named Elsie Mitchell and her 5 children on a fishing trip near Bly, Oregon. One of the children found a strange object in the ground, and when the others went to investigate, the object exploded, killing all 6 of them. News reports called it a blast of unknown origin, but the object had been a Japanese bomb that had traveled across the Pacific Ocean, slung underneath a hydrogen-filled balloon. Again, it was remained a closely guarded secret, but regardless, folks, the Mitchell family had been the victims of the first intercontinental air attack in the United States during the Second World War. The Japanese have been launching these balloon bombs since November of '44, many of them ending up in the Pacific Northwest, with some of them traveling as far as even Texas and Michigan. Secrecy was an absolute must for fear of causing a panic among the civilian population, because these terror weapons were constructed not to try to go after us or to gain any tactical or strategic advantage. It was simply to try to improve morale of the Japanese civilians and workers that were working in the factories in mainland Japan, to see that something was being done to attack the United States. So when the Triple Nickles got to Pendleton Army Air Base, they found an empty airfield and its facilities, which once housed a B-29 bomber training unit. War was winding down at that point, but the Triple Nickles became the largest element on that base, but still found themselves facing the prejudice of the white base commander, an Army Air Corps colonel, who quickly made it very clear that he did not like having an all-black unit at his installation. The officers and NCOs and the troopers of the Triple Nickles all ate together in the same dining facility, despite this racial bias amongst those who were assigned to the air base. The town of Pendleton wasn't much better. There was only 2 bars that would allow the troopers to either go in and grab a beer or get a bite to eat. But the Triple Nickles, they made the best of it and maintained the professionalism that they've always been known for. So once the Triple Nickles arrived at Pendleton, their battalion commander, Captain Porter, and their operations officer, Lieutenant Wills, began formulating plans of how they were going to get after this mission and how they're going to do it. So the basic plan was the Triple Nickles would work in teams based out of Pendleton, where they would be on a standby to rush to any forest fires in several western states. They had guys from the United States Forest Service that would assist them on suppressing these fires, but they would also have to have folks on standby in case there was a suspected Japanese incendiary device that had been located, in order to seal off the area and dispose of them. So over the first 3 weeks, the Triple Nickles would get training from the smoke jumpers of the U.S. Forest Service on rough terrain jumps into the heavily forested areas of the Pacific Northwest, using their parachutes, new ones which actually could be steered by controlling the shroud lines, training on the maps that the Forest Service uses, and also learning the basics of firefighting, how to attack the spread of the forest fires. And they were also given basic demolitions training in case of having to disarm one of the Japanese bombs if they were found. Now, a lot of people equate the Triple Nickles and their smoke jumping duties as being the first smoke jumpers in the United States. And I'll have to tell you that doing my research, in 1939, the U.S. Forest Service actually began training and began the concept of using smoke jumpers or parachutists to fight forest fires. So there was already quite a bit of experience in doing those types of operations, and that's why the U.S. Forest Service trained the Triple Nickles at Pendleton. As they begin, and if you notice here, so this troop, we have Lieutenant Clifford Allen from the Triple Nickles, and you have some of the guys here that are shooting up next to one of the C-47s on the airfield at Pendleton. If you notice, they've got these modified suits which were designed to protect them while they did their rough terrain jumps into the forest firing areas. Some guys have these canvas suits, others are wearing the fleece-lined heavy leather Army Air Corps flight gear normally worn by bomber crews. Again, it was to just protect them from when they came through the trees on a parachute jump in order to try to fight a forest fire. They weren't always going to be able to find a clear drop zone to drop these guys on, so they did prepare to be dropped in the trees if they had to be. Now, all right, go to this next slide. So is also, if you notice here in this photo, folks, they modified their Riddell football helmets by adding a cage to the front to protect their face when coming through the trees in a parachute jump. So you can see Trooper Clyde Thomas. You can get really close, good look at the equipment that he's got. So he's wearing the heavy fleece line leather flying suit, parachute on his back, about 150-foot long rope in case he gets stuck in a tree that he can use to climb down on, a modified neck protection flap in the back of his jacket, and of course the football helmet with the cage to protect him as he comes through the trees. Within 6 weeks, every one of the Triple Nickles in the battalion that were sent to Pendleton were qualified as a smoke jumper and on that training for that. So what they also decided to do was split the battalion in half. So in July of 1945, July 14, 1945, the detachment went to Chico, California, so they had two different places they could stage out of. And it was the Chico detachment that actually responded to the first parachute jump, on the 14th of July, 1945. The Pendleton detachment would soon follow suit with their first mission on 20 July, and that was at the Meadow Lake National Forest. So once they got on the ground, the troopers would fight forest fire using hand tools. They have an airdrop with them, and they could be on those missions for 4 to 6 days. Throughout the rest of the year, they fought fires in Oregon, California, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and even Canada. If the teams managed to locate a firebomb, some would be detonated on site, while others would be retrieved for intelligence personnel to look at. They also did a training mission for a U.S. Navy fighter squadron. They staged a 4th of July demonstration jump at Pendleton, Oregon, and attended the Pendleton Roundup Rodeo. Now, if you look here, here's another trooper. He's got all his gear on, waiting aboard an aircraft. And I thought this was kind of cool. This photo I found, so it was Operation Firefly. If you notice on the nose of the C-47, they had painted Firefly, kind of nicknamed the aircraft. I thought it was kind of a neat photo. Now so folks, these are some photos I'm going to go through that'll show just pretty quick that have to do with these guys on the smoke jumping missions. Great photo here from the National Archives that shows two teams inside a C-47 getting ready to do a jump near the Willowa, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, National Forest in Oregon. You notice the guys have the jumpsuits on, the leather fleece line jumpsuits, the football helmets with the cages. If you notice here in the middle, that mesh bag with the parachute, that's one of their door bundles. They would push those door bundles out first, and that had the majority of the equipment they would use on the ground, shovels, pickaxes, that kind of stuff, as well as rations in case it was a longer mission, to kind of sustain them while they were on the ground. Here we see some of the C-47s taken off from Pendleton, an actual parachute jump here, descending onto a site of a forest fire. Now this here, so here's Richard Williams again. So Lieutenant Williams, or at this point Captain Williams, and Lieutenant Clifford Allen behind him are the jump master team looking out the door of the C-47 to spot a drop zone that they can drop the team that's in the aircraft led by Lieutenant Harry Sutton, which is this gentleman right here. So what they would have looked at out the wing of the C-47 so they can see the fire. And basically, he's on a headset here that you can see probably talking to the pilot like, hey, we got to find a place to put this team down. Not the greatest terrain selection for a drop zone, but something that but the guys in the aircraft were able to call where they're going to put their folks out of the aircraft at. And another vantage point of what they would have seen out the door of the aircraft, trying in the terrain and selecting a drop zone. These photos were from a training jump that was done in the Umatilla National Forest while they were training. So here we get a 6-man team in the air. If you notice in this photo, you can see the parachute here, but if you look real closely, there's one of the troopers that's kind of bear hugging that tree, trying to figure out how he's going to get out of that, hopefully just climb down safely out of that high of a pine tree. Once they got on the ground, they break out the Pioneer tools and what was dropped in the bundles and dig clearings to keep the forest fire from spreading. Of course, you have your unsung heroes, the parachute riggers. These are the riggers in their rigging shed at Pendleton Army Airfield, rigging the T-7 parachutes, as well as the equipment bundles that were used to that the troopers would use once they got on the ground, and these have like pickaxes and shovels and that kind of stuff. Medical personnel, the Triple Nickles. So medical staff, some would accompany some of the missions, but the majority of them would stay on site in order to treat personnel as needed for jump injuries and other things that happen with the unit. So Captain Charles Burks, here's the surgeon. Here we get the medical officer, Captain Tweed. Captain McCain was the dental officer. First Lieutenant Tyler was the assistant surgeon, as well as the three orderlies, Tech 5 Harris, Tech 5 Lewis, and Tech 4 Lorenzo Leathers. So after successfully completing their mission, I'm sorry, let me go back here a second. So by the end of the 1945 fire season, which was from 14 July to 6 October, the Triple Nickles have participated in 36 missions, 19 from Pendleton and 17 from Chico, with more than 1,200 jumps. On August 6, 1945, Private First Class Malvin Brown was killed after falling 140 feet during a letdown exercise from a tree while fighting a forest fire in the Umpqua National Forest in southern Oregon. He was the first smoke jumper to die while fighting a wildfire since the program's inception by the Forest Service in 1939, and he was the only member of the Triple Nickles to die in the line of duty during World War II. So they completed their mission and they returned to Camp McCall in October 1945. With a rapidly demobilizing army, the Triple Nickles were used to kind of support details across Camp McCall, and they eventually moved to Fort Bragg in December 1945, where they were assigned to the 13th Airborne Division, which this is the insignia here. And these are the barracks at Fort Bragg at the time. Now, shortly after that, they were assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. And this ended up being one of the prouder moments of the Triple Nickles. As on 14 January 1946, 350 troopers of the Triple Nickles were asked by Major General James Maurice Gavin, the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division, to march with the 82nd in the Victory Parade up Fifth Avenue in New York City. Gavin had no requirement to bring the Triple Nickles with him, but he did. He'd heard about the unit, he was impressed with their record, and he wanted to have them there as part of the division. And as two-star generals tend to be, they kind of get what they want when they do those things. Gavin would actually be an unsung hero for the Triple Nickles when they were reassigned. He had them assigned to the division a month later in February of 1946, and he always had the utmost respect and admiration for the Triple Nickles. This photo here is an actual photo from 10 January 46, showing the Triple Nickles getting ready, doing a rehearsal for the parade on 14 January in Washington, which you see here. Also, on the 6th of April 1946, the Triple Nickles marched down Michigan Ave in Chicago, Illinois for the Army Day Parade, led by Captain Porter is there in front, leading the about company plus that marched in that parade. The jump school, we had 4 officers from the Triple Nickles actually assigned here, the Airborne School, in middle of 1946, July of 46, so that we continue to train African American paratroopers, and to help them do that, Lieutenant Thomas McFadden, there's Captain Williams again. He was a battalion executive officer at this point. Captain Lane, who commanded Company A, and Lieutenant Killo, who was the mess officer. The battalion, the troopers, they then went back to Fort Bragg by May of 47. We can see the assembled battalion staff of the Triple Nickles. Here's Captain Williams again. This right here is Captain Gates, who is now the new battalion commander of the Triple Nickles. So a few months later, they were attached to the 504th Parachute Infantry to support Operation Combined 1 here at Fort Benning. It was a 6-week mission to demonstrate the capabilities of the parachute infantry to several units around the Army, and they were returned to Fort Bragg in October 1947 and be assigned to the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So this picture here shows some troopers getting ready for a jump at Fort Bragg in June of 46. And this is Tech Sergeant Sidney Turner of the 555th, who prepared his mascots. If you can see, there's Butch and there's Champ for a training jump at Benning in August of 1946. I bet you they weren't too happy going on that parachute jump, even as puppies. Now, so once the troopers had come back to Fort Bragg, they were assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, but they kind of knew the writing was on the wall. So at 1100 hours on 9 December 1947, the Triple Nickles stood in formation on the 505th Parade Field. Major General James Gavin, commander of the 82nd, and Colonel William Ekman, regimental commander of the 505th, presided over a review of these fine paratroops. Colonel Ekman read the integration orders to the assembled battalion, and when he was complete, the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion was inactivated, its personnel being integrated in the 82nd Airborne Division as the new 3rd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Major General Gavin thanked the assembled troopers for their exemplary service to the Triple Nickles and welcomed them to the division as the newest All-Americans of the 82nd Airborne Division. Folks, the legacy of the Triple Nickles would continue in the Korean War with the establishment of the 2nd Ranger Company, an all-African Ranger unit that served with distinction during the Korean War from December 1950 to August of 1951, where they completed a combat jump with the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team near Musan-ni on 23 March 1951. When we talk about legacy, that's still, as Freddie Celestine, retired Sergeant Major, my boss, talked about earlier, their impact is still felt even today amongst our Army. Great photo here showing, and this photo here is William Morris and his family, where there's this statue is at Fort Leavenworth in the grounds of the Command General Staff College. This uniform here is an actual Triple Nickel uniform that's in the collection of a good friend of mine, Mr. Luke Keating, over the 1st Battalion, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment at Airborne School. The guide on here is at the Airborne Special Operations Museum in Fayetteville, North Carolina. This marker is here at Fort Benning, and this is a great photo of some of the original Triple Nickel guys with President Barack Obama about 10 years ago. So their legacy is something I think we all must admire. Despite the overwhelming odds of racial bias, prejudice, and inequality during America in the 1940s, the parachutists and paratroopers of the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion set the standard for professional conduct for every officer, NCO, and soldier, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, or economic background. The Triple Nickles proved that discipline, professionalism, physical fitness, and technical proficiency created the reputation and ability to accomplish any mission placed before them, and will ensure that their legacy will last throughout the years in the history of our great United States Army. Folks, and here's some references, and if you have any questions, more than happy to entertain them here in a second, but here's all the sources I use for this presentation. And of course, my shameless plug for my museum here, the National Infantry Museum. If you ever get a chance to come up here to Columbus or here to Fort Benning, we'd love to have you. The picture on the right is the actual building I'm standing in or sitting in right now, our restored World War II barracks here in the World War II companies. Just want to say special thanks to Abby Edens from the National World War II Museum for offering me this tremendous opportunity to talk about these great paratroopers from World War II, the Triple Nickles. Thanks also here to the staff of the museum, my Brigadier General retired Pete Jones, Colonel retired Andy Redmond, Command Sergeant Major retired Freddie Celestine for his remarks, Scott Daubert, Jeff Reed, and Chris Gaudreau from the Army Museum staff, Colonel Rob Chapa of the National Infantry Association, Mr. Luke Keating from headquarters, 1st to 507th Airborne School, John Arson, Ralph Alvarez, and Chris Ruff at the 82nd Airborne Division's War Memorial Museum at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Mr. Jimmy Hallis at the Airborne Special Operations Museum in Fayetteville, my paratrooper brother, Lieutenant Colonel retired Paul Narowski, and most of all, my wife, Mikey, for your support, advice, and putting up with me and my unhealthy addiction to anything that has to do with World War II paratroopers, and for helping prove some of my stuff. Thanks, babe. I love you. Thanks for listening today, and hope you guys were able to learn something about these true pioneers in our nation's history, the Triple Nickles. I'll see you in the drop zone all the way airborne. We're standing by for questions.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Chris. And we do have a few questions. There was a question by Calvin in our chat, and he was wondering whether the reason the Triple Nickles never saw combat was it tactical or was it political? And I don't know if you could speak to that.
Sure. We talked about a little bit earlier. It was more, they didn't see combat simply because when they got to Camp McCall, and I mentioned this earlier, they weren't a full, they didn't have a full MTO authorization as a battalion. They had done company training and platoon training, and they excelled at that, but they just didn't have enough officers and enlisted guys to form all three companies in a headquarters company to be a deployable battalion to go to combat. It was basically just a series of numbers. I don't think it was capability at all. It's just they just didn't have the guys to be able to do it.
Okay, I have another question. Whoops. Let me see if we've got a question here on our Facebook chat here. I don't think we do here.
Okay.
Oh, here we do. Yes. So we have a question from Bree. How long did the 555th stay segregated, and were they given the same GI Bill rights as white soldiers?
Yes. So when the 555th, when they became the 3rd to the 505th on that day in December 1947, the unit, part of Major General Gavin's plan was to start. He kept them there as a battalion initially. They did have white officers, but slowly but surely they started spreading out to other units within the division. You would see by I'd say 1948 to 1949 that you would see a good mix of African American soldiers amongst all the infantry battalions in the 82nd. The way I can tell you that is I have a yearbook for the 505th from 1949. The 3rd to 505th still had quite a few African American soldiers, but then you saw African American soldiers in almost every other battalion in the regiment, as well as other units within the division. As far as the GI Bill, that is a great question. I do not know an answer for that. I would guess, my guess is yes, because a lot of those soldiers would go on to get degrees and then continue to serve in the Army as officers. There's only one way you can do that, as with a college degree, but that's, I'd have to go dig in to actually find out the answer to that. That's a great question though.
Yeah, we have another question here too. Could the 555th have been attached to a white battalion as a Negro company to participate in combat? Would that decision be political?
So the fact that a company was being trained to deploy to be taken over to Europe in early 1945. So I think somebody was thinking about that, and there was some, it's kind of hard to guess if it was political or not, because it's hard to see what the decision was. I really didn't find any orders or any kind of documentation that said why that company in early 1945 was being established to go over to Europe as an individual company. But my guess is, with the war winding down, they were probably like, hey, let's get everybody, give them a chance to take a crack at the Germans or the Japanese or whatever. Here we get this unit, even though they're not at full strength, let's get a part of them trained up and get them over there. So yeah, it's just hard to tell, but pretty safe guess. But without the background behind it, it's hard to say.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I want to be very respectful of everyone's time here online. But again, I want to thank Chris over at the National Infantry Museum, as well as the National Infantry Museum itself. If you have not been, please make sure to make that a stop. It's in Columbus, Georgia, right there on the Chattahoochee. Please definitely check out their museum. And of course, we would love for you to check out the National World War II Museum here in New Orleans when it is safe to do so. We'd love to have you all come by and see our museum as well. We want to thank our sponsor, AARP Louisiana. And of course, thank you all today for joining us for this wonderful talk on the Triple Nickles. Have a wonderful day.